Silent Eclipse is a first-person action wave survival game where players have the ability to build structures, but environmental hazards force them to constantly be on the move. Silent Eclipse is going to be set in a post-apocalyptic world that has been taken over by robots. In Silent Eclipse, you experience the game through the eyes of one of the last surviving people on Earth. Players will be trying to survive against waves of enemies that are trying to kill them. When a player successfully kills an enemy, that enemy has a chance of dropping an item that the player can use to build structures and turrets. These structures and turrets, however, do not regenerate health, and the player has no way of healing them. Most wave survival games would have the player sit in one spot, build a base around them, and wait for enemies to come and knock it down. Silent Eclipse looks to break this trend, however, by having environmental hazards come in and make the player move their base constantly. And by having barricades not be repairable, it means the player has less incentive to stay in a single area. The goal of the game is to survive against the robots for as many waves as possible, while also getting the highest score possible. Score is acquired through killing enemies and staying in environmental hazards for extended periods of time. There are three major environmental hazards that occur in Silent Eclipse. The first is Death Fog. Death Fog damages the player but does not harm the robots, giving the enemies an advantage that they can use to push the player out of a defensive situation. Lightning storms have a chance to strike and deal damage to both players and enemies. And lastly, meteor strikes deal damage to both sides, but where a meteor lands, it will destroy any player-made structures. The main anti-force of the game is going to be the enemies that the player will fight. There are 4 different types of enemies. The first one is a grunt, which has average stats equal to the player, and when it's killed, it will drop a bone knife that the player can use and will give them additional damage. The next type of enemy is a blitzer, who is a lot faster but has much lower HP than the grunt. However, when they come into contact with a player or structure, they will explode. If the player kills them before they explode, they can get the black powder off of their dead body and use that to create traps. The next type of enemy are wizards, who have a medium HP, but they have a ranged attack, so they can attack players and structures from a distance. When they are killed, they drop a magic stone that players can use to create turrets. The final enemy is the Hulk, who is slow, with lots of HP and does high damage, and when he is finally brought down, he drops the parts for a barrier that the players can build to help defend themselves. One game Silent Eclipse could be compared to is Killing Floor. Killing Floor is a first-person wave survival game just like Silent Eclipse. However, Silent Eclipse uses environmental hazards to force players out of situations where they feel comfortable and make them roam around the map. The largest risk that Silent Eclipse faces is the scope of the game. There are 4 different enemies and 3 different environmental hazards. It could be possible that a team of students might not be able to complete the full game in only a few months. One way to mitigate these risks is to follow the development cycle of the game for 1 month, and if at the end of the month the team is unable to have at least the player controls, grunt enemy, and placing structures down, then the scope of the game needs to be reduced. To do this, 2 of the enemy types will be removed along with 1 of the environmental hazards. With all of the systems in place, the player has to decide when they want to stay and fight and when they want to leave for a new area. For example, if a player has a structure set up and they're attacked by 2 lone grunts, the player stays behind their barrier and defends it. Then, a ranged wizard comes and the player has to move to attack them. After that, the player has a lightning storm strike their defenses, but the player decides to stay in the storm because they get more score and they have a chance of not getting hit by the storm. After this, a blitzer finally comes up and destroys the barrier that the player has been using to defend himself, and the player has to run away. My name is Zachary Stancliffe, and thank you for watching the second pitch for Silent Eclipse.